Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Richard, good to see you this afternoon. How are you?
Hi, Ted. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm pretty good, actually.
Good. Other than fighting some cold weather there. Are you in London?
Yeah, I'm in London. Yeah, North London. Yeah.
I think the whole world must be in a cold snap right now because all over the United States it's freezing cold, and it sounds like it is over in the UK as well.
Yeah. Oh, not as bad as some of the East Coast cities, but it's pretty bad over in London. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well, good stuff. I appreciate you joining. I think many of our listeners probably know who you are based on your work at Artificial Lawyer. And but for those that don't, just wanted to give you a chance to do a quick introduction. I was interested to see that you were an editor at ALM. You had a short stint at Thomson Reuters, and you founded Artificial Lawyer in 2016, which was quite a bit before ChatGPT lit the world on fire. But yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and where you do it?
Yeah, no, sure. So I started in the legal world in 1999, so 26 years. Oh my God, it's a long time. I joined what was effectively a startup in 1999 called Legal Week, which was a legal magazine focused on big commercial law firms. I joined as an international reporter. At that point, it was an independent business created by a couple of people who'd left a more established magazine called The Lawyer in the UK. And I was, as far as I understand it, either one of the first international reporters or the first international reporter for the commercial legal market. That was the only thing I did. I only covered international mergers, international expansion, office opening, joint ventures in Singapore, US and UK law firms merging, UK law firms opening an office in Amsterdam. That's what I did. So I went straight into strategy. So like within, a couple of months of getting up to speed with how big law firms worked, I was right into strategy and the business of law, because the first question you ask anybody as a journalist, why are you doing this? Why have you just merged across the Atlantic? Why have you just opened in Singapore? And then they start telling you stuff. And of course, you've got to try and figure it out and understand it. So I very, very, very quickly got introduced into the world of strategy and business, which is kind of like not what I expected when I trained as a journalist. I kind of thought, I'll be working at The Guardian or something like that, So I ended up completely without any planning. I didn't choose to work at Legal Week. A friend had a job there, and I was looking for a job. And the general rule as a junior journalist is just get the first job you can and get going. Don't sit around. Just get going, get cracking. And then it just took off because the legal market then was very exciting. Globalization was really kicking off. The big UK law firms were expanding at an incredible rate. It's hard to remember those days. I mean, if the legal market now was doing what it did back then, so particularly younger people who are probably, don't remember those early days 25 years ago, would just be amazed. I mean, law firms like Linklaters, for example, just a classic example, went from being, sort of medium-sized, high-quality Magic Circle firm in London to forming alliances with every major top-tier firm across Europe, and then merged with all of them, pretty much. And then expanded in the US, expanded across, Asia Pacific and so forth. Just an incredible expansion. Now you might be thinking, why is he talking about this? Well, that then led to me becoming eventually a management consultant, because I was so focused on business, so focused on strategy, that I then became a management consultant. And I joined a strategy group that was inside Thomson Reuters, and then I didn't stay there that long, and then I joined a sort of UK-based strategy consultancy. And I spent 5 very interesting years there. It was kind of like doing an MBA in law firm business strategy, and learned an enormous amount. And it was my last year there, which I think was around 2014, 2015, one of the things I had, so I was head of research, and I also had my own consulting gig, had my own clients. One of my jobs was to do reports, big, deep analyses. So, what's going to happen with growth in China? So I'd get into the World Bank data, I'd get into all kinds of huge data analyses projects, and I would like rip out the data and analyze it and then try and like connect it to what was happening in the legal market. And, then we would give those to big law firms who would then sit there and consider it. And then, obviously the idea is they would engage you on big consulting projects. And one of the ones that I did was about technology. Where is technology going? And AI came up. Now, I've always been interested in technology. I've always found it fascinating. But AI just kind of popped up, and I just thought, yeah, this is really something real. And I think the last thing I did while I was working for that consultancy in London was I did a chapter on AI, or legal AI, before I'd even heard the term. And I just went off on one. I was just like letting myself go, and I was coming up with ideas like, what if two different law firms both had an AI, and the different AIs were using game theory to negotiate a contract? And I was, I'd never read a legal tech magazine. I didn't even know that legal tech was a subject. Right. I mean, I knew there was a company or two out there, but I didn't know what legal tech was. I hadn't got a clue. And this is interesting, right? I mean, I started in the legal world in 1999, right? And I first wrote about legal tech or legal tech related things in 2015. So what's that? 16 years. Yeah. In 16 years, legal tech never, ever got above a third or fourth tier subject amongst managing partners, who were primarily the people I was talking to. Maybe practice heads, but it was almost always managing partners. So legal tech did not come into it at all. I mean, it was like the only time legal tech came up was once or twice when someone said, "Oh yeah, we're having to buy a new practice management system. It's a real pain. It's really expensive, and it's coming off our bottom line, and I'm really upset about it." And that was it. It was just like, okay, well, yeah, whatever. Let's get on. Let's talk about more interesting stuff, like who you're going to merge with. And then the AI changed everything really for me. I mean, I did that. I mean, after that, just by chance, I then, decided, I think I'd probably had enough of working inside someone else's organization, decided to create my own business. So I launched my own consulting business. And while I was doing that, I saw something about a company called Raven, which is now part of iManage and has been absorbed, and that brand name has disappeared. But it was an independent company in those days, and they kept on popping up in the news for the things that they were doing using AI. And I went to their office, which was in Shoreditch, which at that point was super cool. It was kind of like Brooklyn in its heyday. Super, super cool. And I went into their office, and they showed me how it could zip through a whole load of real estate documents, and it did it in just a few seconds. And it pulled out all the, obviously we didn't do an accuracy check or anything like that. I just assumed it was all perfect back in those days. And they just laid it all out. They just said, bang, there you go. We pulled out all the key parts of the contract. This is this. And I just said, wow. And it just hit me because, like, for years and years and years, I've been working, with law firms talking about profitability and, revenue per fee earner, the leverage model, all of the things, profit margins, I mean, people used to, most of the people, you might see my consultant colleagues, used to talk about timekeepers. That was the standard phrase. People would just talk about timekeepers. They didn't talk about lawyers. Talked about timekeepers, because if you're a consultant to a law firm, there's a whole bunch of different people. I mean, in some cases, there are more people who are not lawyers than there are lawyers in some firms, because there's a whole enormous hinterland of support, all kinds of things going on. Other times it's smaller, but so we talked about timekeepers because that was the bit that was generating revenue, but it didn't mean that the other part of the business wasn't important. But now suddenly here is this thing that I've just looked at, and I'm just and it just boom, it falls into place into my mind. I'm just like, this is going to change everything, because up to that point, the entire business model of law firms, except as has been explored earlier by other people, was e-discovery, but particularly from a UK perspective, which is more transactionally based, There's less e-discovery type work over here. It just like hit me. It's just like, wow, if AI takes off in the legal world, the entire basis of the legal industry that I've been like living with and living within for all these years is going to completely and utterly and absolute transform. Right. Now, at that point, that's really early days, end of 2015, beginning of 2016. I didn't understand the subtleties at that point, but I quickly did. And I just thought, this is going to be so transformative. It's going to be so transformative. And I decided to start a blog, Artificial Lawyer, which originally was going to be called several other things, but I settled on Artificial Lawyer because I thought it was a good title. It's funny because I didn't want to talk too much about myself at the beginning, but the funny thing is it actually helps to connect to the bigger issues that I'd like to get into as we go along, which is it's all about the means of production, right? All about productivity. It's all about moving from an artisanal manual labor, legal labor model to one that is industrialized. And I remember, I think it's probably after I started Artificial Lawyer, I remember changing my job title on LinkedIn to legal industrialist. Because I grew up in the Midlands, and which was the home of the Industrial Revolution, or at least part of the Industrial Revolution. And the teacher, in history classes, we were taught about the Industrial Revolution. We didn't do the Napoleonic Wars and stuff like that. We did the Industrial Revolution because it was almost you were the history teachers were allowed to pick variety of options. You could focus on Napoleon and Wellington and all of that, or you could do something different. And our teachers, because we were in the Midlands, and that's where it all started. We focused very, very much on the Industrial Revolution. So we learned about the spinning jenny and the beginning of the steam engines, and how the railways developed, the growth of factories and iron smelting and all these things, and the whole way that industrialization changed the world. And so for me, it was kind of like it was kind of like buried in the back of my mind, been there for decades, literally, and it just kind of all just fell into place. And I was just like, yes, this is it. This is literally it. This is it. This is the thing that changes the foundational basis of this industry. This is going to be extraordinary. No, that was 2016, right? Now, people were, at the time, some people were just like, yeah, this is awesome. And, I met a whole bunch of people who totally got into it. Sometimes people were actually into the AI stuff, but they were not as gung-ho as I was. I mean, there was a whole bunch of companies pioneering back then. The people like Kira, there was eBrevia, there was Seal. There was a whole bunch of AI companies, legal AI companies, the very first way, using machine learning, natural language processing. Now, of course, we look back at what they could achieve and what they can do is still good, but it looks extremely niche, very narrow. And, as time went by, I kind of realized that, AI was, as it was then, was limited. But I never really ever gave up hope that there would be this transformation. But what I didn't know was that generative AI was going to come around the corner. I mean, to me, it just kind of felt that the machine learning AI would just get better and better and better. And that somehow, I couldn't quite figure out how it was going to get there, it was just going to spread out and really start to have a real impact at last. And that's actually, that's one of the reasons why I got so into looking at the business model. Because, I'd often think to myself, well, why isn't it spreading? Why is it because the tech doesn't work? But I mean, by sort of 2017, 2018, the tech was pretty good. I mean, if you were doing a due diligence task and you'd been using a particular type of, AI software for a long time, for several years, they'd been training it up, you'd been training it up, and you knew what you were doing, you were going to get very accurate results. It wasn't like the early days, by 2018, 2019. And yeah, it just wasn't really picking up. I mean, I used to go on to in the UK, you can see how much revenue certain companies make. You can see, because it's public. And also you could tell just by looking at how many people other companies had hired, you can have a pretty good guess of what their revenue is. If they've got 10 people, 30 people, 100 people, you can have a guess of they're making 5 million, 20, 30, right? And the revenues for the AI companies were so low, so incredibly low. And you're like, well, how is that possible? They got a good product. A lot of people are still going nuts about it. There's so much talk about AI, even in 2018, 2019. And yet, if you look at their revenues, that tells you a completely separate story, right? Because, financial data really tells you a story, as I'd learned back in the day when I was just doing consulting all the time. And I thought, well, what is going on? And that's when I started really getting into analyzing the billable hour and other things, law firm culture, the leverage model. And again, that brought back a lot of stuff I'd learned as a consultant. In those days, the idea was to try and encourage people to exploit billable model and the leverage model as much as they possibly could to expand their profitability. And there's nothing wrong in that. We want law firms to be profitable, to attract the best talent, to do great work and so forth. But it was clear to me that there was a structural impediment. So I spent a lot of time on that. And then in 2022, along comes ChatGPT. And that really changed everything, because for the first time, people were saying, this is the AI I've been waiting for. With the early machine learning stuff, I remember people sending me messages going, yeah, this is all very cool, but this is not AI. Or if this is AI, it's really not what I imagined. It's very, very narrow what it can do. It's very niche. The irony is that most of that machine learning software did get absorbed. You go to 100 different companies, it got absorbed into e-discovery. It got absorbed into legal research. It got absorbed into a dozen different verticals in the legal tech world. So, AI did have an impact. It did get normalized, but it didn't change the world. It was like round one. It was like MySpace, right? It was MySpace of legal AI. And although very few people exited for 200 million, although some people eventually did, of course, because they added a bit of Gen AI on the end and did extremely well for themselves. But yeah, I don't want to get too much into individual companies, and so that's kind of brings us up to speed. And generative AI changed everything and this is a funny thing as well, because there's a whole bunch of people people from Richard Susskind to, other sort of people who really pioneered away, like Noah Weisberg, Ned Gannon, Jim Wagner. There's a whole bunch of really pioneering people, who there were the people who were actually building stuff. There were people who were constantly writing and being kind of like a cheerleader and trying to, do stuff. And then there was a whole body of people who were really, really yes, this is it. But the tech just wasn't there. But this is the irony is that as soon as generative AI arrived, I found myself having exactly the same discussions I had back in 2016. So will AI get in the way of training lawyers? So if a junior lawyer's day job is done with AI, how are they going to learn anything? How are they going to learn how to review a contract if you use AI? Is it the end of lawyers? That was, literally, I know already that seems dated, but back in the end of 22, beginning of 23, people were seriously debating that again. And it was so weird. It was almost as if it was a complete deja vu. But it was almost as well, it's kind of it's like the world had been prepped. I don't know if have you ever read the Dune books or watched the Dune movies? Okay, well, all right, I won't go down. I won't go down that road. But basically, there's this idea that the way is prepared. You're preparing the way, and that first, and then when it really happens because you prepared the way. You've put in place the metaphysical concepts. You've put in place some of the discussions. Some of the books that analyze the big philosophical questions have already been written. So it's almost like when the thing actually hits for real, bang, it's actually we know what to do with this stuff. We know what it's gonna. We know the impact. We know how to handle it. And of course, it has spread like wildfire. It's extraordinary. Now it is relative, right? It is all relative, and I think sometimes people think that I'm a bit negative, but I'm not. I'm a short-term pessimist, long-term optimist, right? I'm completely realistic about the challenges. I've been covering this sector now for what?
9 years?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not very good at maths. I did do A-level maths, but basic maths is not my forte. This, we're just at the beginning. even after all this time, we're just at the beginning. We are just at the beginning. So, like you mentioned, you might want to talk about agents. Agents are a bit ropey. They're a bit flaky. They're not accurate enough. Um, People keep saying that 2025 is going to be the year of the agents. It's going to be the year of people playing with agents.
Well, well, one thing struck me on what you said, and
Mm,
that was how when you were covering law firm strategy, the topic
mm,
of technology would come up, and it was hey, let's talk about something more interesting. And historically, so I've been involved in the industry since 2008, tangentially even earlier than that,
mm,
and technology historically has not been a strategic imperative for law firms. There's many reasons why. They operate on a cash basis. Um, there is a lot of lateral movement within law firms. We call big law firms here sometimes hotels for lawyers,
mm,
because there's so much. It's so transient in nature, and that makes capital projects difficult because
mm,
for many reasons, especially because as the law firm leadership that rises through the ranks by seniority and oftentimes by being the best at lawyering as opposed to who's necessarily the best leader, and the
mm.
fact that law firm ownership is exclusively lawyers in the US,
Well,
except for
that's an interesting point. You see, I people thought that the Legal Services Act in the UK was going to change everything. It didn't change anything, hardly anything. It was a complete damp squib. The as I said in an article in Artificial Law the other day, it doesn't matter who owns a group of lawyers who are in a particular sort of type of corporate entity. If they don't change how they work, nothing changes. Uh, the fundamental thing is that they did not change how they worked, and they did not change how they worked because they didn't see an incentive to do so.
right.
There was no burning platform, and there was no incentive. There was no lily pad that was better and more golden to jump onto, and there was no burning platform either. And the thing is that law firms can do incredible things. It's like going back to like when I was in the midst of the globalization of the legal market. I mean, law firms, very very conservative organizations on one level. When they want to move, man, they move. Right. I mean, these large English law firms and large US law firms just went around the world like a supernova, just went poof, in about 2 years. They went from like being 500 lawyers to like, 3,000 lawyers with like from 3 offices to like 25 offices. And that required a lot of investment as well. And they did that. And they did that because there was a gigantic advantage. And there was also a gigantic threat, right? If they didn't globalize, they would lose their clients. And if they did globalize, they could charge way more. And also there would be far fewer of them because there's far fewer really top tier global law firms, well, certainly back 20 years ago there was, than there were just good firms in various each local market. Now, with legal tech, we're not there yet. Legal tech is still seen as decoration, right? It's like an IKEA catalog. You flick through it, you go, yeah, I'd like one of those squeamish, pillows and a shelving unit and whatever, doofer, made out of whatever. And it makes your life easier, makes your life nicer as a lawyer. It's more comfortable, it's more pleasant. You shave away some of the inefficiency, but it never really gets into the billable work, right? We're still in that stage. We haven't, but this is things I do honestly believe that the train has left the platform, right? And that's why I wrote an article a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, which some people either loved or hated, but I think it's absolutely true, which is, it's the end of, the legal world as we know it. And I feel fine because it is, because finally, someone has lit the touch paper. The fundamental things that were needed, right? It's like revolutions. There's some famous revolution. I'm not sure which one said it. That for a revolution to start, you need the right conditions. Right? You can't just have a bunch of revolutionaries. Right? You can't have as many revolutions as you like running up and down the streets going revolution. If you don't have the right conditions, right, nothing happens. You just get a lot of really annoying demonstrations. Right? Nothing actually ever changes. And I think this is what's different. I think the conditions are there. Now, am I expecting rapid change? Absolutely not. I mean, once bitten, twice shy. I mean, my estimate, and I don't know where I got this from. It's kind of almost like an instinct, and I could be wrong. Is we'll get to where we need to be, at least the end of stage one, in 2037. That's my bet. So about a dozen years.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't think we'll get where we need. And when I say where we need to be, I mean real transformation. I mean, in the same way that no one really uses landlines, we've all got mobile phones, we've all got smartphones. Same way that people don't go to lending libraries anymore. We all use some form of digital, entry point. That's the kind of transformation. I'm talking real transformation of the legal market. It's going to take about a dozen years.
Well,
But we're on the way.
yeah, well, and how far we are down that path is an interesting question. So I looked at I have it up here, the 2024 ILTA Technology Survey, and this question could have been asked better, but the question was, is your firm using generative AI tools for business tasks? For law firms 700 attorneys and above, the answer was yes for 74% of the firms. Then on another screen here, I have Thomson Reuters reports that says just 10% of law firms have a Gen AI policy.
Yeah, but I don't think. I mean, I don't. Most of these tables these surveys have limited value. I mean, some of them better than others. Some are really good. Some, but and also they're out of date by the time they've been written in many cases. Particularly when it comes to like Gen AI adoption. The reality is that the vast majority of big law firms are using generative AI in some way. The reality, though, is that very few of them are actually using it to alter how they're doing billable work or significant amounts of billable work. They're using
Absolutely.
it up to the edges. One of the metaphors I use is the pizza. So imagine like a really, really chunky deep dish pizza with a beautiful cheesy crust, crust without any cheese on it around the edge, right? The crust is being eaten away by generative AI, right? There's no more crust on this pizza. How like you go to like how everyone like eats pizzas in a different way. Like some people cut them into like sort of like completely irregular sort of like parallelograms, and other people just cut them into tiny slices, and other people just fold them up and it kind of like that's kind of like where we are. But fundamentally, the real center of the pizza, where all the good stuff is, that's not really being touched very much. It really is, but that's the thing is, once it is, I mean, law firms are not that complicated, right? They're actually one of the simplest businesses on the planet. As corporate organisms go, they're incredibly simple. They're mostly corporate. They're mostly partnerships rather than corporates. They're individuals. You have a small group of owners who are the equity partners. You have a pyramidal base of leverage, which goes down mostly by age, seniority, which is ranked to some degree on the complexity of the work that they can handle, and they get charged different amounts as well. It's a beautifully simplistic model. It's wonderful. To make as much money as possible, you just work as many hours as possible. All you have to do, even if you get big write-offs, doesn't matter. Just as long as you're busy, everything's cool, right? You're on the hour. The financial risk is someone else's. You have to pay for professional indemnity insurance, but beyond that, as long as you don't mess up, everyone's happy, right? We're all happy. And the clients, despite everything they say every single year, are generally allowing the law firms to do whatever they want. And I think fundamentally, the reason why they do that is because they've come out of those law firms in the first place, because that was their training ground. And secondly, because I think and it's one of these things that people don't like to talk about. It's another elephant in the room, like the billable hours, another elephant in the room, which is I think a lot of corporates enjoy. Enjoy is not the right word, but they actually, they feel comfortable spending a lot of money on particular law firms in the same way that people want to go to certain ski resorts. Snow is snow, right? You don't have to go to some luxury 8-star resort in wherever, where they sprinkle caviar on the piece, for you. Snow is snow. You can just ski. But let's face it, right? We live in the real world. Society itself is pyramidal, stratification. There's all kinds of weird. You could argue illogical social behavior, but then if you argue equally that one of the aspects of all pyramidal society is sort of hierarchical control and hegemony and all these kind of things. We can get into some really sort of deep philosophical stuff. You're like, and this is one of the problems is that you look at a basic law firm business model and you just go, this is completely irrational. Of course, new technology will be absorbed. They will drop the billable hour. They will move on to fixed fees. They will increase their profits. They will send out the message to the clients that this is the way to go. It's so obvious. It's so logical, so, but it doesn't happen. So, I've spent literally years like getting into it, and it is fascinating. It is fascinating. And, I think one of the fundamental problems of the legal industry, commercial legal industry, is that the buyers are not the buyers, right? The buyers of legal services, right, don't go anywhere near the law firms. So the CEO of Goldman Sachs doesn't go wandering around law firms, and I'm sure he tries not to, right? It's the lawyers inside Goldman Sachs who engage the law firms outside, and they all came from those law firms in the first place, and probably have relations, and they were probably intermarried and went to the same schools and play at the same tennis clubs and all this kind of stuff. And it's like a social stratification type thing. That's an extreme example, but that you might say that microcosm plays out across the entire planet, all markets, even down to the smallest country town. So you've got that, and then of course you've got this point about the legal market effectively polices itself, controls itself. So the police force for the legal market, at least in many countries, is the bar. The bar is run by lawyers, and effectively you might say the executive branch, and this sort of like control organization of courts, the judges within it, they're lawyers, obviously. So it's kind of like they've got all the angles covered. But this thing is like, and I think and I think a lot of people have argued, understandably, for a long time, that if we can get rid of that, then the whole legal market will change. But we did this in the UK years ago. It changed absolutely nothing, right? I could, if I had enough money, I could buy a law firm, right? I could walk around the city of London with my checkbook and go, right, I'm sure the very large ones would tell me to bugger off, but maybe a very small one would say, okay, fair enough. If you've got enough money, you can have us, right? And then I could list them on the stock market. I mean, after that, I could say, there's enough of that. I'll sell them to a private equity fund. It would make absolutely no difference at all to the legal market unless they changed how they worked.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a chicken or the egg concept in my mind. I think that, so this transformation of ownership rules is underway here in the US. And you've heard about the big four stepping in, KPMG specifically. We've heard this before.
I think it'll have no effect at all. I think it will have almost zero impact, personally.
And a lot of people agree with you. I'm on the other side. I'm on the other side of that this time. I know we've seen there's been this industrialization of legal services in the past, right? With ALSPs, and then, the big four consultants coming in previously, E&Y standing up a fairly big organization around delivering legal work. The reason I think it's different this time is just because there is a mechanism where it's going to put pressure on the billable hour in a way where I think outsiders coming in with different skill sets and evaluating the problem domain within legal. Historically, legal has been such a bespoke artisan industry, as you point out, and now we're in a place where that is under pressure. And if this movement does get traction, where, again, the big four will be the first entrance into the space, but private equity could be not far behind. There will be management structures and boards of directors in place that are no longer lawyers, that are going to look at these problems differently and how to solve them and how to build innovation. Legal innovation is an oxymoron. It's like saying jumbo shrimp or military intelligence. There's very little innovation that happens in legal. And I say that with love. These are my customers, the legal innovation teams. And I'm not saying there's not innovative work happening, but the fundamental structural elements of law firms hasn't changed at all. And
that part I would definitely agree with. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's what innovation is. So, chief innovation officers are really mostly focused on improvement, not innovation. They're incremental improvement officers. And it's not for a lack of skill. I know highly skilled, innovative thinkers in these roles, and it's not for lack of trying. It's the culture, it's the industry, it's the ownership model. All of these things have been so well entrenched, and the pricing model, the client engagement model, the internal firm compensation model, these things are so firmly entrenched, and there has to be movement within those elements in order for there to be real change, and there just hasn't been an appetite for that. So I'm less skeptical than you on this go round, but ultimately time will tell, right?
Yeah, well, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. The thing is, I mean, in a funny way, it's like I'm actually more optimistic because I'm like my big picture view is like really, really transformative. Like, I mean, it's kind of, I mean, for me, it's like an exponential curve. It's just like what's happening at the moment. We're really at the bottom of it, and it looks so slow and so small. But when we really start to get up, into the higher parts of that curve, it's really radical. But like I say, we're looking at a decade plus to get to that radical bit. I mean, this was simply doing the groundwork. We're preparing the way. And the irony is that there were people even before 2015. I mean, I think was it Brevia can trace its roots back to I think about 2012 or something. I mean, there are people who've been working in this field using these ideas and coming up against these problems, which we're knocking around, for like 20 years, well, 20 years, 13 years. And, but we will get there. I mean, I think this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, the age thing is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because, if you were 20 and you were at a law firm and someone said to you, like, in 12 years, the industry really is going to change. I know we all keep talking about whether that change, but it really will change. You'd be like, well, if I stay at this law firm and I become a partner, I'll probably just be really getting into high gear. I'll just be really, really motoring at that point. And I'll be perhaps even an owner if I'm lucky. It might be an equity partner if I was really lucky. And wow, yeah. So it's going to be very, very, very interesting for that generation. Whereas if you're an equity partner now and you're like 45, heading towards 50, these are smart people, right? They can see how much change there's been so far, and they're just like, yeah, I'm going to see out the rest of my career and into retirement before anything really, really looks like a burning platform.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I did a little research on the billable hour. So it's really only firmly been entrenched for about 50 years. It was formed.
And it was Hale and Dorr. It's funny that you sent me that because I actually found that out myself. I was doing some research and I actually contacted Hale and Dorr twice to see if they wanted to talk about it, and they never replied to me. So I don't know if you've got any good buddies at Hale and Dorr, but if they would like to talk about the birth of the billable hour. But originally it was started as an access to justice move.
Exactly.
I thought that by having clarity over what something costs, because obviously in the old days people would literally just look at you, they'd look at your shoes, look at your pocket watch, and go, "Where do you live? Okay, right. So it's going to be this much." And they would literally, they would just be like, "What's this guy worth?" Right?
Right.
They would just charge whatever they felt. And then the idea is that the billable hour would give transparency. So people who didn't have as much wealth would get a fair shake of the stick. And then, of course, that was generally ignored. But then with economic growth, and I think particularly the end of the 70s and certainly with the 80s, there's this explosion of economic growth across the West, globalization, computerization, massive rise in productivity, that kind of Reagan era, Thatcher era, the globalization of capitalism, global capitalism in general. It created this huge surge of work for commercial lawyers. And there's a big expansion of in-house legal teams. It was a real change, a real sea change, in global capitalism, really, really altered. And people started to realize that leverage wasn't just a question of having bodies to do the work, that if you were clever about how you managed it, partner profits could gigantically increase. I mean, that's one of the things, if you go back like 40 years, you look at what partners made. I mean, they were wealthy compared to the average person in America or Britain, but compared to now, they were making a fraction of what they make now.
Yeah.
I mean, that, like, And this is very, very much due to leverage and the billable hour. You could not, I mean, with that, then this is the thing I keep trying to like introduce into the discussion, is that you can actually make more money as an owner using technology and fixed fees.
You
But
can, but
people just don't want to go down that road.
well, and what people? Yeah, I don't think it's all law firms. I think the buyers of legal services are also most comfortable with this model that's been firmly entrenched for 50 years. If you talk to inside legal teams, they kind of want the best of both worlds. They kind of a not to exceeds model where, hey, I pay you. I don't know that there's enough trust in between law firm and legal buyer for legal buyer to feel comfortable that whatever that price is set is going to ultimately be fair. And I think it's just been a factor of buyer side hesitation. And on the law firm side, a lot of law firms have been flying blind. Their data has historically sucked right around this. And the ability to build pricing models, it's gotten better in, I'd say, the last 5 years. Like pre-COVID, I started to see like real data work, data rationalization work happening within law firms, and it's accelerated since then.
Yeah, definitely. If you look at all the billing software out there now, it's so advanced. I mean, and then you've got people like, organizations like Sally, which are really helping develop, taxonomies and so forth. I mean, there's no excuses now for, the large firms. They have the data. And the funny thing is the write-offs are gigantic. I mean, I won't mention any names, but I can think of a firm that is literally writing off hundreds of millions a year. I mean, literally hundreds of millions of dollars, total write-offs, right? Now that means that it becomes really bizarre. Like I was talking to someone once and I was thinking like, where's the value? And they were saying, well, the value is in the senior partners, the experience. I said, okay, so that's what the client is paying. So let's say if you do a deal, let's say it's a relatively small deal, it's $1 million, right? Big law deal, right? M&A deal. $1 million. And I said, well, so where's the value there? I said, well, the vast majority of that is the expertise of the firm, historical, IP of these individuals, their skills, their experience. They've been through 100 major deals. They've seen everything. And I said, okay, brilliant. That's perfect. Wonderful. So why is it that 85% of the bill is non-equity partner and below leverage billing? So effectively, you're getting people to do a ton of what you might call manual labor to pad out a bill, which is then sent to the client, who then knocks off a third and says, because, hey, I can. But they've just put up their rates by a third over the last couple of years anyway. So it's an absolute muddle. The idea of the billable hour is that it gives some kind of empirical clarity to what's going on. It's actually the whole thing really it's an illusion. The idea that there's any logic in any of it doesn't make any sense, right? So you've got a junior lawyer who has no technology other than Word and email, plodding their way through a due diligence exercise, right? And the lawyer next to them is using the best AI, all the automation, all kinds of stuff, and they've got a fantastic understanding of data and metadata, and they're absolutely on it, right? They're zipping through the documents like, one every 5 minutes, and a really high accuracy, right? Probably accuracy to the same level as the other junior lawyer, because, the accuracy to some degree is based on their own ability to spot errors, and that's based on experience, right? So like one guy, he's doing a document every 5 minutes, and the other one's doing a document every hour, right? Now, if we were not in the legal world and we were in a completely different industry, and I said to you, so which of these is the more profitable? You'd be like, well, obviously the guy who's going at 5 minutes is a genius. You want loads of these. And like, wrong. This guy is a liability. Get rid of him, for God's sake. It's madness. Yeah. It's madness. Am I the only person who sees this? It's completely insane.
Yeah, I mean, the billable hour does reward inefficiency, and I think that's...
It's not just... I don't think they're doing it deliberately so much.
Yeah,
it's just...
No, I don't either.
I think for me is that it prevents efficiency.
Yeah, right. And that's very true. Talking about the tools for a minute, because I had a visual in my mind when you laid out that metaphor, and I'm going to use Harvey as an example, but the question isn't about Harvey. It's just they're kind of a first mover in the space. You talked about MySpace. First movers aren't always the long-term winners. I mean, look in the software world, Netscape Navigator, Lotus 123, Harvard Graphics, DBase. There's a million examples, MySpace. The first mover usually isn't the long-term winner. And what I'm thinking about when I see these valuations and this massive tidal wave of investment that's making its way into legal tech now, which I think is a good thing overall. But are these kind of early platforms going to be the long-term winners? Because if you look at the amount being invested and what needs to happen in order to hit a valuation that the investors are going to walk away happy about, they kind of have to be. What are your thoughts on,
Well,
that dynamic?
I don't want to get into any particular company because it's kind of unfair to do something that's going to be aired publicly. But just generally,
Generally,
if you look at startup revenues, right, they're relatively small, and they in the legal tech world, and they stay small. They grow relatively slowly. Um, some companies that were given a lot of money very quickly ended up in trouble and got bought. And the founders exited quite nicely, but they walked away with a good amount of money. But the classic, you might say cliche, the Palo Alto cliche of a couple of people in the garage, a credit company, money just starts getting like sucked towards them, like a black hole, and they grow like crazy, bang, IPO, whatever, in about 3 or 4 years. I mean, that is just so unlike legal tech. The vast majority of legal tech companies grow from their seed very slowly, really slowly. I mean, I know companies, good companies doing good work, making decent revenue. Many of them are way below $10 million, right? And that's not names that you will have heard of, right? I mean, there are household names, at least in the legal tech world. If I said X names to you, you'd be like, yeah, of course, really successful, great work, brilliant. And you'd be like, yeah, but do you realize that they've been going for like 8 years and their revenue is about 20 million? Then when you look at their properties and you look at their marketing spend and you look at their staff costs, and then you look at the fact that actually, because they're super, leveraged up with investment and maybe some debt as well now, they're actually not, if you actually look at the balance sheet for real, the revenue is relatively small for a company that's meant to be in the tech sector that's been going for 8 years, right? And secondly, if you drill down into the real numbers, that balance sheet's pretty weak, right? But then they get bought by a much, much larger company who then, does what they do. But that is actually more, the sort of relatively slow growth is actually more the norm. So this idea you get like 100 million or more and you grow like wildfire, that's almost unheard of in the legal tech world. It's really rare.
it really is. And, the legal tech world is also, I have a blog post half written, maybe not even half, but it's called Legal Tech is Small Town USA. And I
Well,
use a metaphor of, the legal tech community is very tight knit. I've been in it for 16 years. It took me 5 years before anybody took me seriously. I don't, some may not still take me seriously. I don't know, but it took a while and it took a lot of relationship building and everybody knows each other. And for someone to come in from the outside and grow and really, several of the, I'm not talking about anybody in particular here, but several of these legal tech AI startups have kind of grown so fast, so quick, at least in terms of balance sheet capital deployed. They haven't really had a chance to build these relationships. And there's been a little bit of skepticism, I think, from the legal tech community about, hey, is this going to be a long-term winner here? Is there, what's the deal
well,
with their tech?
I think the ones from what I've seen, the ones that are planning or effectively, as you alluded to, like needing really massive revenue growth, are looking at things differently. I mean, a lot of the household names in the legal tech world, aside from people like Clio and other ones like that, generally have focused on big law, right?
Mhm.
You can make a pretty good living serving 40 or 50 very large law firms, right? Who've got a couple of thousand lawyers each. You're selling your licenses at, I don't know, let's say the bottom is $20,000 and it goes up to whatever, right? You've got 40 or 50 of those. That's a nice living. Right?
Mhm.
But you're never going to get into the hundreds of millions of revenue just doing that. You've really got to open the market right up. So you've got to do small law. You've got to get into every small law firm. You've got to get into mid-sized law firms. You've got to go in-house. You've got to get into government even, perhaps. You've got to get into everything. You've got to be like Thomson Reuters or Lexis, right? You've got to be indispensable to literally hundreds of thousands of lawyers and different organizations. And they can do that. Most companies can do that, of course, because they were very smart very early on. I don't know if they did it because they knew what was going to happen or they were just very lucky that they got the data. They built those legal databases, great legal databases, and then all the tech was layered on top, right? But that put me in a fantastic position, right, for scaling, because every lawyer who can afford it would like to get their hands on that data, right? Like the licensing, I mean, I don't know how many customers Thomson Reuters has on its legal side. In total, if you add
All of
every
them.
single individual, yeah, every single individual. I mean, it must be gigantic, right? So they can do that. They can do that. How many other companies are going to gain that kind of leverage across the
Right.
market?
Right.
Hard. It's hard.
It's very hard and it takes time, and it's not the VC model is 8 to 10 years on the long side of,
Long
you know,
spec. Yeah.
right. Yeah. It's been pushing longer. It used to be even shorter, but VC investors, these limited partners expect a return, a significant return because it's a high risk and, high risk investment fairly quickly. And I'm looking at these companies and wondering how the TAM in legal is small, total
But
addressable market.
I know what you say, but this is the thing. Someone says to me, I was in Palo Alto a couple of years ago, off the back of our Legal Innovators Conference in San Francisco. And someone I was talking about, I was joking. I said, "Yeah, hey, I should create my own legal tech company." Spent years in this field, and they said, "Yeah, but you'd never make it through the VC round." And I said, "Well, how do you mean?" And they said, "Because you like to tell things as they are, or at least how you think they are, and that's not what a lot of VCs want. VCs want you to paint them a picture, tell them a story, because they're not going to be around to pick up, the end of that story. They're going to drop off about halfway through, and someone else is going to pick it up, a private equity fund or a much larger corporate or whoever. It's going to be a trade buy, and that's one of the challenges, isn't it? Is the you can throw you throw 100 million or 50 million or 20 million at a company. It does grow temporarily quite rapidly. It looks good. The hockey stick started to form, and you say, "Right, guys, I'm out of here." Sell. Right now, it's your problem. You deal with it. You grow this thing like crazy. I mean, how many companies have been bought and then written off?
Oh, so many,
Across history,
so many. Yeah. Even in my little niche, Thomson Reuters. So we're internet extranet platform. And there was a platform called XM Law. Good buddy of mine, Rob Saccone, founded it. Thomson Reuters bought it and basically killed it. They did nothing with it. So it's pretty common. Well, I know we're running out of time here. I want to make sure that I give you a minute or so to just tell people how to get in touch or learn more about the content. Your content is fantastic. It's been an honor to have you on the show. I could talk for hours, but tell people how they might find out more about your work.
Yeah, it's easy. Just type in artificial lawyer into Google or your search engine of choice. Take it from there. And if you're kind of person that likes in-person events, we also do the Legal Innovators conferences, Legal Innovators UK in London in November, and we're doing the next big event. We'll be in California, in San Francisco, June 11th and 12th in central San Francisco, which should be a lot of fun over 2 days, and it'll be our fourth event in the city. But generally, yeah, just type in artificial lawyer. I'm on LinkedIn every day, multiple times. I generally use my own personal account. So Richard Tromans, Tromans. That's probably the easiest way to find me. And yeah, thank you for listening and thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. We didn't get to a lot of the stuff we were going to talk about. We had a great conversation, and that's the goal. So maybe we can revisit at some point and do it.
I'd be honored to come back. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, great. I really appreciate your time, and maybe I'll see you at Legal Innovators. I'm gonna make a note to take a look at that San Francisco conference and see if we can put that on the calendar.
Yeah, no, that'd be awesome. That'd be great.
Good stuff. All right. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Andrew, take care.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by Info-.